Salute. Good girl. Yeah? Not in the RLC, were you? No, you're not an RLC dog. Well, there goes all my RLC subscribers. Anyway, what did I want to talk about today? I want you to picture this scene. You're on your phone or you're at your computer and you're typing a tweet or a Facebook post. And I'm telling you now that what you're about to post before you hit enter is not a crime. There's nothing criminal in what you've posted. You hit enter and you assume now that this tweet is in the digital space that the police are not interested because, as I mentioned, it's not a crime. I mean, they might actually not be interested because, it's a sponge cake recipe, unless it's got writing in it or something like that. But in many cases, despite the fact that objectively what you have posted is not a crime, the police will still be interested. Why is that? Because of this creation, this weird terminology of something called non-crime hate incidents that you can now fall afoul of. Yes, what you've posted is not a crime, but the police may well be very interested. Now, why is this at the forefront of my mind? Well, I'll tell you. It's because just last week, on Remembrance Sunday actually, Telegraph journalist Alison Pearson was visited by the police for committing one of these so-called non-crime hate incidents. And I don't even know if you can commit a non-crime, but that's the terminology that I'm going to go with. So I know what you're thinking. What actually happened? Well, we don't really know, because the police wouldn't even tell her what the tweet was that apparently offended somebody. The police won't tell her. It makes you wonder what the point was in going to interview her, but you won't even tell her what she's supposedly done wrong that isn't a crime about a tweet she posted and then deleted a year ago, but someone is offended. They also wouldn't tell her who her accuser was, but they were very, very quick to point out that accuser is not the right terminology. They are the victim. So they're presumed to be the victim because they're offended. Listen, I don't know who needs to hear this, but you being offended does not make you a victim. Simply being offended by something does not make you a victim. I dread to think what would happen if Frankie Boyle did a live roadshow today and a bunch of 20-somethings went to watch it. I mean, he would probably have about 3,000 non-crime hate incidents against him. Now, to be clear, Alison isn't the only journalist to have had this happen to them. Another journalist that I follow called David Atherton had a similar experience. He made a post, effectively with some pretty strong language, telling people if they wanted to protest over Gaza, they could go to another country and do so. This was immediately logged as a non-crime hate incident, and he was invited to a voluntary interview at the police station, which he refused to attend. He refused to attend it, and then he received an email telling him, if you don't come to the police station, you will be arrested. So much for voluntary, I guess. I don't know if you can hear the gunshots, but this dog is completely unfazed by gunshots and loud bangs, and I guess that's one small merit to having an army dog. She is not bothered in the slightest about loud bangs. She grew up with them, she doesn't care. Now, we already know that in Britain, you can go to prison for a very long time for your social media posts. Nothing new there. But just to highlight how bad this problem is, we sent last year 10 times the amount of people to prison for social media posts as Russia did. And I can only imagine that when we add in this year's statistics, that's going to get a lot higher. That's how bad the problem is. Yet we always think of Russia as a totalitarian and evil state. And there's almost certainly some truth to that. But when it comes to free speech, I think we need to maybe take a look in the mirror. Now, there is something to me that's very particular about these cases. And that's this. The police have already, by this point, done enough investigating to determine that this is not a crime. The clue's in the name, non-crime hate incident. Okay, and I'm not a proponent of hate speech or anything like that, but I am a massive free speech absolutist. I think that one of the best things that America has is the First Amendment, whereby you can effectively say whatever you want. And we have to accept, of course, that comes with some difficulties, and people will say some very offensive and horrible things, but that's how you protect free speech. Now, to put this again into just a little bit more perspective, in terms of these non-crime hate incidents, or NCHIs as they're calling them, a 9-year-old, many children, but a 9-year-old specifically, has been found, I guess not guilty, but has been visited by the police for one of these incidents. Now what she did was, she called another classmate a retard. That's the French word for slow, by the way, before anyone gets offended. I don't mean to offend anyone there. And she has effectively had this registered against her, and that's a police record that will be kept. Given that she's a child, it might not be kept for life. But if you're an adult and you have one of these, that will be kept for the rest of your life. That will be on a police record that you have said this. So strange. Why are police wasting time not solving burglaries, not solving muggings, but going after people who have committed non-crimes? To me, the second part, hate incident, is where they try and sell it to the public. But if I told you that the police were spending any amount of time, but I presume it's quite a considerable amount of time, investigating non-crimes, if I just said that, you'd be livid. You'd be absolutely livid. You probably are livid anyway, but such a very bizarre situation. Okay, so we understand what NCHIs are, but why do they exist? Why do they exist? Now, this is speculation, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct. And I think that they exist because they effectively give the state a tool to force you to self-censor. Now, imagine that you've never been in trouble with the police and you post something on Twitter and then all of a sudden the police come knocking at your door. If that's the first time you've had an experience like that, it's probably absolutely terrifying. And at that point, you don't want that to ever happen again. So you're just going to self-censor. You're just going to not say things that you think are a little bit controversial or that might land you in a little bit of trouble. You're basically just going to shut up and put up. And I think that's what it comes down to. It's like a state-mandated bullying tool. They've acknowledged that you haven't committed a crime, but they don't like what you're saying, so we're going to pay you a visit. And that's probably going to be just enough to get most folk to stop saying anything that's critical of the country, the government, immigration, whatever it may be. And on that topic, just to really flesh this out, this happens a lot. What's really happening is that the country is facing a lot of self-induced problems, particularly around things like immigration. We're frequently told that diversity is our strength and all that good stuff. Our culture's being enriched and immigration is a benefit to the nation. And yet the data which would prove this is never ever given to the people. What data would prove this? Well, how much migrants contribute to the economy. Now you're going to go and find some figure, okay, but what you won't find is a figure that tells you how much migrants take out of the economy in terms of welfare payments. What you won't find is data about crime rates by ethnicity or nationality or immigration status, for example. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is because it's all a symptom of the same thing. There are real problems in this country, and rather than deal with the real problems, the causes of these real problems, the state would rather deal with the symptoms. They would rather deal with you complaining about it rather than the actual difficult problem that needs to be solved within the country. So by silencing and forcing you to self-censor and basically making you shut up, they've kind of achieved that aim. The problem goes away for a little while until it doesn't. And eventually, these problems, if they're not treated, will become utterly insurmountable. Utterly insurmountable. Some poor government in 1, 2, 3 terms' time will be left with a terrible problem, but in reality, it will have been one that could have been fixed many terms before by making difficult decisions. I should add as well that it's not even just the state that does this. This happens in all walks of life. You are always forced in your head to self-censor. You know, if you say the wrong thing, you'll lose your job at work. If you don't think that, let's call them young people, should be able to have surgery to alter their gender, for example, you could lose your job for that, despite the fact that that's not controversial. To me, that's not controversial, that's common sense. But you could lose your job for that. So you're constantly forced to self-censor what you really think. And it's time now that people really shook out of that. Now, just in case you needed a little bit more evidence about how the justice system in this country is loaded primarily to keep you suppressed and keep your voice shut, I'm going to put a story up. I'm going to blank out certain words and I'm not even going to talk about it. Trigger warning, and I don't really like trigger warnings, but this is absolutely horrendous. But I'm going to put this story up, and this guy got a suspended sentence. Okay, so you've seen that now. I think that is absolutely horrific, particularly given that the person in question was a trainee school teacher or something like that. That's really horrifying. Suspended sentence. We have people sat in prison right now in Britain for years for wrong speak, saying the wrong thing, you know? Many of them actually were pretty much forced to plead guilty during the period of the riots. And if they hadn't pleaded guilty, they probably would have been let off. Some of them are now going through appeals, and their sentences are being found to be manifestly, like, far too overblown, just ridiculous. So hopefully a lot more of those appeals come through for these wrong speakers. Some of them will have said things which are very, very bad. But as I say, I am a free speech absolutist. You can say whatever you want about me. You can offend me. I don't care. I might be offended. I'm not saying that I might not be offended by something you say about me. But I accept that you have a right to say it. And I'm just going to move on with my life. Water off a duck's back, you know? Come here. Come say hello to Stephen. Come on. There you go. You've probably heard someone say at some point that free speech is the bedrock of democracy. And it sounds like some lofty, wafty thing, but I completely believe it. And here's why I believe it. People vote, their votes make governments, and that's democracy. What influences how people vote? Well, it's the information that they have available to them, the things that they understand around their country, the policies that are happening, how their life is being affected by those things. As soon as we start to suppress free speech, particularly in the political arena and around political areas, you are inhibiting the amount of information that someone can freely receive. And that then, in turn, will affect their voting decisions. Now, why does this happen? I'll tell you why this happens. Because I think that if, as I mentioned, some of that data which the government simply will not give us, although real credit to the Reform MPs, they are pressing the government really hard to collect and release this data. All of the data by nationality and things like that for welfare and crime. But if a lot of that data were released and people understood it, then I think there would be a massive voting swing to the right. And that is kind of what's happened with X. If you're watching this video, you probably have an X account, formerly Twitter. And what's effectively happened there is they used to censor, delete accounts. The FBI or MI5 would reach out and say, hey, get rid of this account. I presume that's what happened to Tommy Robinson. Special Ranch or MI5 reached out and said, hey, can you get rid of this account? And the previous Twitter owners, well, it was a public company, but the previous Twitter managers complied. They got rid of his account. Now what you're seeing is basically you can go there and it's free speech to an extent. There are some limitations, there are policy limitations on things that are just deliberately really hurtful, okay? But it's definitely a lot freer than it was before. People are not just being arbitrarily censored because they have a right-wing political leaning. That sort of thing isn't happening anymore. What happened after 2 years of X being under this new leadership of Elon Musk? A massive swing to the right. People were able to now report on things like migrant crime in the United States, millions of people coming over the southern border. We were able to more closely come together and look at some of the progressive liberal movements that are frankly shocking, things that are taking place in schools and stuff like that. And it made people realize just how bad things have got. All of the voices that would have been critical of that kind of thing had been censored and removed from mainstream platforms. They've been removed, and they still are, from Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all of that. But X kind of opened that up and said, hey, you can talk about these things now. As soon as that happened, a massive swing to the right of politics. And I think that's what really scares, in particular, the Labour Party and a lot of other European governments. You can see that, since X became free speech, I would say, with limitations, which is their policy decision, you've had the rise of parties like the AfD in Germany, which is, admittedly, a far-right party in Germany. But because people are able to actually see the information, they only have one social media platform now where they can post their information. It's got so big, the AfD in Germany, that the other parties are voting to ban the AfD. The AfD is now the second largest party in Germany, and the other parties want to ban them. What's effectively happening is that the previous measures that were put in place to censor people's views and stop them observing the things that are happening around them, seeing the truth, speaking the truth, reporting it, understanding it, those measures have been taken away now by Elon Musk. And they're effectively resorting to the only thing they have left in Germany, which is to delete the AfD from the ballot. That's all they can think of left to do. Completely undemocratic. If, you know, the second biggest party in Germany, I think they've got about 30% of the vote share, as I understand it, and growing. If 30% of the people want to vote for a party in Germany, and the other parties want to ban that party from existing, that's not democracy. That's really just not democracy. I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent away from free speech there, but it kind of all ties back to the same point. Having free speech is really important for democracy because it allows people to make informed voting decisions. That's really what it is. No longer are you force-fed just from one source or one stream of information and told to comply, comply, comply. If you have free speech and everyone has it, you can talk about these issues to people openly. That's why I love the First Amendment in America. I think it's amazing. And look, I've seen some clips in America that would shock people in Britain. You know, a guy will walk up to a police officer, so the exact person who could arrest him, and start saying like some frankly really racist things to that police officer. Like there's no ambiguity there. He's being extremely racist. And of course that's shocking and offensive, and it's unfortunate that some people feel that they need to act that way. But that's how entrenched the First Amendment is in America. That police officer knows he can't do anything because the other guy has a right to free speech. Try that in the UK and see what happens. Genuinely, you'll be in prison for years. Yeah, absolutely, years. And a lot of people will say, well, too right, good on you, so what? Okay, and that's how they justify these restrictions to you. But then it gets, you know, further and further and further down. Now it's your tweets, soon it's your DMs to people, you know, being monitored, and oh, you said a naughty thing and DM to someone. You whispered something in someone's ear that wasn't appropriate. Off to jail. Now, on the topic of free speech, I am making a documentary at the moment, and have been for a little while, about the migrant crisis in Europe. And of course, that's a sensitive topic. The documentary is going to feature as much data as I can find, particularly from countries like Denmark and Sweden, about crime statistics by nationality and immigration status and things like that, to really try and paint a picture just so that people have the facts available to them. I'll go through the causes of the crisis, the effects, which is all of that data, and then some proposed solutions. Now, the reason it's all going to be data focused is because, you know, I also don't really want to knock at the door from the police. If everything that I put in there is based on data and you have the source, that's just journalism, right? That's just objective journalism. I don't know what else can be done to bolster that. I'm also going to interview someone, and it's a very controversial figure. Some of you will have heard of him, some of you won't. And I was thinking at the time, do I interview this guy for the documentary or do I not? And I came to the conclusion that, you know, I'm very opposed to people self-censoring and not expressing their views, or saying, oh, maybe I won't speak to that person, or I won't do this because whatever, they're a bit controversial. So when I really thought about it, I thought, if I have integrity, I have to go and speak to this guy. You know, he's a guy with some answers, or his proposed solutions to the migrant crisis. It'll be very interesting for the video. Will it get me in trouble? I don't know. Hopefully not. But if you want to see that, I don't know exactly when it'll be ready and when it'll be out. It's taken a very long time to put together, probably in the next couple of weeks. But if you subscribe, you won't miss it. It'll be there. So the very last thing I'll say is, if all of this irks you as much as it irks me, then there is one small thing you can do about it, which is you can join something called the Free Speech Union. And it's a good organization. I think it costs about $5 a month. It's cheaper if you're like a veteran. It's a little bit more expensive if you're not. And there's different tiers of membership, whatever. But you can go and support that organization. And for their members, if they find themselves in hot water, for example, they'll provide support and assistance. And particularly if you are, I don't know, an outspoken person, then you might need the protection of the Free Speech Society, which, now I'm saying it, is pretty sad.